It's Wulf, and it's time to talk about some of the cars in Driveclub. Driveclub is a racing game that came out back in 2014. It's PlayStation exclusive and has not yet been released on anything other than PlayStation 4. It actually came out a couple months after the PlayStation 4 itself released and was one of the first major racing games available for the console. It was developed by Evolution Studios, who previously had made the MotorStorm games, and Driveclub is not as intense off-road focused as MotorStorm was. But it's also not a full simulation game, it's more of like a simulation-cade game that is a little bit of both, at least with the settings that I've been playing it at. But anyway, the focus of today's video is some of the cars in Driveclub. Driveclub actually has a handful of cars that were either cars that never really came out, they were only concepts, or even manufacturers that have shut down or just didn't produce that many cars in the first place, that kind of thing. I'm probably not going to spend a ton of time talking about each individual car because there are more than I expected that I'm going to talk about. So anyway, on to the first one. It is the Hennessy Venom GT. So, the Venom GT is actually one of the few American cars featured in Driveclub. Although, that being said, the Venom GT is based on the Lotus Elise and Exige type of platform. So, it's sort of British too, but it's made by an American company. And Hennessy otherwise mostly modifies American vehicles. Driveclub's specifications for this car have it at a 7-liter twin-turbo V8 engine. It's rear-wheel drive with a rear mid-mounted engine, 1,244 horsepower, 1,155 pound-feet of torque, and it weighs 2,743 pounds. And by the way, if it sounds weird when I'm reading out Driveclub's specs for these cars, it's because Driveclub has them listed in kind of a weird way sometimes. And also, there is some surprising specificity in Driveclub as to where the engines are mounted, I think, because normally I've always heard of just like front-mounted, mid-mounted, but the game gets really in-depth. So with this car, rear mid means that it is behind the front axle, but in front of the rear axle, so like towards the back of the car but not behind the rear tires. The Venom GT does appear in some other media, so it's not as rare as some of the other vehicles in this video, but it's a pretty cool car nonetheless. I like it. It's one of the few American cars that shows up in the game, and Hennessy in general makes some really cool cars, so I wanted to include it. Next up is the Renault Automobili Concept 1. The Concept 1 is an electric car, and Driveclub has it listed as front rear for drivetrain, which I think means that it has an electric motor in the front and the back. And it also has something listed as AWTV, which when I googled is the Renault all-wheel torque vectoring system. Driveclub says that it makes 1,088 horsepower, 1,180 pound-feet of torque, and it weighs 4,299 pounds. Something that I think is kind of interesting about this car in particular, and a handful of the other cars in this video, is that it doesn't appear to have a rear window. Instead, it has a camera on the center console that acts as your rear view mirror. And I've noticed a few cars that I'm talking about in this video do that. And there's also quite a few electric cars in this video. It's kind of interesting because this game is about 10 years old now, so some of the concept cars here are things that, I don't know, don't seem so futuristic now, because 10 years ago, electric cars existed, but there weren't as many of them. They weren't as prevalent, and so there's a lot of electric concept cars in Driveclub. Next up, I've got two Renaults and then two Peugeots. I decided to just group them together because there's two of each brand. I mean, not all together, but like by brand. You guys get what I mean. So next is the Renault Desir. According to Driveclub's stats, this is another electric car. This is rear-wheel drive, rear mid again, so engine is in front of the front tires but behind the driver. Makes 147 horsepower, 166 pound-feet of torque, and it weighs 1,830 pounds. And I'm also just realizing now that funny enough, this car actually makes about half the horsepower of my real-life actual car. I have a Dodge Challenger GT, which is a V6 Challenger, and that makes about 300 horsepower, but according to Wikipedia, this can do 0 to 60 in 5 seconds, which I think is about similar to what my Challenger can do. And apparently this is a zero emissions car, and the doors open differently on each side. It says on Wikipedia that the doors open like a butterfly door on the driver's side, but a suicide door on the passenger's side. And this is also another one with no back window, so no rear view mirror. And actually, this in fact does not seem to have any mirrors. All of the mirror functions that you would expect are performed by cameras, which is an interesting concept, but in practice I feel like that could cause some issues because, like, what if the cameras stop working? But anyway, it's just a concept car. The other Renault here that I'm going to talk about is the Renault Twinrun Concept. The Twinrun appears to be a sporty version of the Renault Twingo, and it's interesting to note that the Driveclub version of it appears to have like some sensors on the front bumper. So of all the concept cars, this one looks kind of interesting because it is based on a real car, so it's not like you couldn't get one of these, but then also this one in particular almost looks like some sort of testing vehicle with the stuff that's on the front there. Driveclub's stats have this as a 3.5 liter V6 engine. It's rear wheel drive, also another rear mid engine mount. It makes 320 horsepower, 280 pound-feet of torque, and weighs 2,094 pounds. For such a small car, it's kind of interesting to see that it is a rear mid engine because the engine would be behind the driver again. But then if you kind of look at it, it makes sense because there is a good bit of space behind the driver, I think. This was always one of the cars that I had a lot of fun playing this like a long time ago when I actually played through the game for the first time. Just because it's so tiny but also goes really fast, it's an interesting car to drive in the game. Then we have two Peugeots, and the first of which is the Ex1 Concept. This is one of the more strange-looking cars in Driveclub, and in a lot of ways it reminds me of those Polaris slingshot three-wheel things. I've seen those in real life a number of times, and frankly I don't know why anybody buys them. But it reminds me of that because even though it has four wheels, the back like tapers, so the rear two wheels seem to be closer than the front two wheels. According to Driveclub's stats, this is another electric vehicle. It is four-wheel drive and it is front rear again, which makes me believe that it probably has a motor in the front and the back. So it is 335 horsepower, 354 pound-feet of torque, and 1,653 pounds. Even though the horsepower isn't as crazy as some of the other vehicles on this list, this is one of these cars that I bet in real life would feel exceptionally fast because that is quite a bit of horsepower. It's also pretty light as well, and there's no roof. This is also one of the vehicles in the game that, since it doesn't have a roof, your character will wear a helmet while driving it, and if you're driving in first person, you'll see like the outline of the helmet. This car also has a really interesting door mechanism, which is one of the cool things about Driveclub, and I don't really have a ton of time to get into like the design specifics of all the vehicles in this video, but it's cool how in Driveclub, when you go to select a car, you can see your character get into the car because it shows a lot of intricacies, and also answers the question of how exactly are you supposed to get into some of these vehicles, because sometimes cars, it's like, where's the door handle? This one, like, the entire seat moves outward, and it's just really interesting. It gives the vibe a lot of more of like a toy than an actual vehicle, kind of like that Polaris slingshot thing I was saying earlier. You're not really going to be able to use that as a daily driver, whereas even some hypercars and stuff, if you really wanted to, you probably could daily drive them. The other Peugeot is the Peugeot Onyx Concept, and this one looks a lot more like a normal car than the EX1 did. Driveclub's stats on this actually have it kind of a strange powertrain. So it's a V8, but it says it's a V8 hybrid turbo plus electric. And I looked up on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia says that pretty much it has a V8 twin turbo engine, and apparently a diesel one at that, and then it has an electric motor that provides 80 horsepower. So there's a lot going on there with it possibly being a diesel according to Wikipedia, and then something to do with that electric motor, which I can't tell if that's always on or if it only turns on to boost the power of it a little bit sometimes. Anyway, other than that, it's all-wheel drive, and it says that it is just mid-engine, which I'm guessing would mean the engine might be under you. I'm really not sure what is going on with this car the more that I read it. And also, if I didn't mention it, it's a 3.7 liter V8 apparently. It makes 680 horsepower, 921 pound-feet of torque, and 2,425 pounds is what it weighs. It's strange because it looks pretty normal for a concept car, but also it has so much strange stuff going on under the hood. And yeah, I just looked at the Wikipedia page again about it, and it doesn't really give any extra info about where the engine actually is. It too just says that it's mid-engine, and interestingly, actually, it says that on Wikipedia, it says that it's rear-wheel drive, whereas the game says it's all-wheel drive. Next we have the DS Servolt, or possibly Shervolt. I'm going to say Servolt because that seems more correct. And it is another electric car, and I think that the color scheme they've got going on with this car kind of fits the electric thing, and then also the name having Volt in it stuff with like the black and the blue almost like lightning. Driveclub has this listed as another electric car. It says it's rear-wheel drive with front-rear engine mounting, so since it doesn't really have an engine, probably another one of these ones with motor in the front and motor in the rear. But that is strange because if this car is rear-wheel drive, then why would it need an electric motor in the front wheels? And I decided to look at the Wikipedia page for this also, and Wikipedia has it listed as an all-wheel drive car, which I think is more likely because it would be really weird to put motors in the front of an electric car if you're not actually powering the front wheels. Makes 300 horsepower, 354 pound-feet of torque, and weighs 2,535 pounds. And another funny thing that the Wikipedia page says is that apparently when Top Gear reviewed it, they said that it was a nice car, with the exception that it is very hard to climb in and out of. Looking at the animation that they have in Driveclub of entering this car, I kind of can understand where Top Gear is coming from, because the animation has the character literally like grabbing the roof and swinging themselves into the car, so it's still not entirely clear how you actually get in and out of this vehicle. And then one other interesting note that I found on the Wikipedia page is that sometimes this is referred to as a Citroen Servolt. Next up is the Icono Volcano, and according to Driveclub, this has a 6-liter V12 engine. It's rear-wheel drive, but the engine is front-mounted, so it's like traditional in front of the wheels. 950 horsepower, 479 pound-feet of torque, and it weighs 3,516 pounds. When I looked it up on Wikipedia, it didn't really have that much info about this car, and in general, Googling it didn't really seem to pop up that much info either, other than the fact that it is in fact a sports car and does seem to exist. One thing that Driveclub shows is that it has kind of an interesting door mechanism in that it has a sort of upward tilted suicide door. Like you pull it from the front of the door, like the end more towards the hood, and it pops out, but then it also goes upwards and backwards, and then it seems to inside have a interesting touch screen placement in that it's like to the right of the steering wheel, but it's not just a normal rectangle, it's kind of this vertical screen. I think it's interesting when you see infotainment screens inside of concept cars or otherwise cars that are like very, very expensive, because it's just like, I wonder who's using CarPlay right now in this super expensive hypercar. Right next to the Icono Volcano in Driveclub's car list, we'll find the Maserati Avantra. Driveclub's stats have this as a 7-liter V8 rear-wheel drive with mid-engine mounting, 751 horsepower, 625 pound-feet of torque, and weighs 2,866 pounds. According to Wikipedia, this car is exceptionally rare. It says, quote, that the Avantra is produced on commission in a maximum of 5 units per year, and it also has it listed that the production was only between 2013 and 2022, so 9 years. 9 times 5 is 45, so that means there seems to be a maximum of 45 of these that exist. Also, fun fact that the Wikipedia page has a thing that says, this is not to be confused with the Hyundai Elantra. No way, I thought they looked so similar. Unfortunately, this is another one of these cars that there's really not a ton to talk about because it's kind of probably because there's not that many of them, but Wikipedia just kind of says the specifications of it, but not that much else. Something interesting that is on Wikipedia is that this vehicle is also available in some of the asphalt games, which is a common theme that I'm noticing, that these vehicles in Driveclub, like the rare ones, if they're not in many other games, they're usually in asphalt for some reason. Now we have a car from a manufacturer that doesn't exist anymore. It's the Marusia B2. According to the game, it is powered by a 3.5-liter turbo V6. It is rear-wheel drive with mid-engine mounting, 420 horsepower, 302 pound-feet of torque, and weighs 2,425 pounds. Although a V6 that makes over 400 horsepower is not necessarily a small engine, it is interesting to note that I believe this is the second smallest engine that we've had in the video so far, because most of of the other stuff has been either electric, V8, or V12. It's quite literally in the name of this car, but this is a Russian car, and according to Wikipedia, Marusia was actually the company to develop the first Russian sports car, which was the B1 model. Marusia also owned a Formula One team for a while, but as I hinted earlier, Marusia has since gone out of business, and according to Wikipedia, this happened in 2014, which is interesting because that's the very same year that Driveclub came out. Next, we have one of my personal favorite cars in Driveclub. It's the Sauvage Revol GTR-s. And I should note that even though Driveclub has the name listed as just that, a lot of the times when you look this car up online, it also has Road Yacht in the name, so it would be Sauvage Revol Road Yacht GTR-s. Driveclub says that this car has a 6.2 liter turbo V8. It is rear-wheel drive with front mid-engine mounting. It says it makes 800 horsepower, 575 pound-feet of torque, and weighs 2,271 pounds. The thing that always caught my attention about this car in the game is that it looks like a normal supercar, right? And you would think it would be 2 doors, but actually this is a 4-door vehicle. So apparently there is room in the back seats, which is really unique. A lot of supercars and hypercars and stuff end up just being coupes rather than sedans, but this is a sedan. And then we have the GTA Spano, which according to the game has a 8.3 liter supercharged V10 engine, rear-wheel drive with rear engine mounting, 820 horsepower, 708 pound-feet of torque, and weighs 2,976 pounds. So right off the bat, something that is a little bit strange about this car is that in the game it is listed as just the GTA Spano, but on Wikipedia it is the Spania GTA Spano, and it's a little bit confusing because I guess Spania is actually the manufacturer name of this vehicle, but that doesn't seem to appear anywhere in Driveclub. Also, according to the Wikipedia page, apparently this vehicle has appeared in a lot more things than I initially noticed. It was in the 2014 Need for Speed movie, I guess, which is kind of funny because then it also says that it only appeared in one Need for Speed game, but otherwise it's appeared in a few Forzas, a couple of Asphalt games, and of course Driveclub. Next, we have another vehicle that isn't necessarily as rare as some of the other ones in this video, but I think is just kind of interesting anyway. It's the Motors Lykan Hypersport. Driveclub says that this is powered by a 3.8 liter flat 6 twin-turboed engine. It is rear-wheel drive with a rear mid-engine, 770 horsepower, 708 pound-feet of torque, and weighs 3,086 pounds. This car has a lot of interesting facts about it, and for one, I believe that this is the only one on the list powered by a flat 6 engine rather than a V6 or V8 or V12 or an inline something. This is also the first sports car to be designed in the Middle East. Also, the engine itself has kind of an interesting story when it comes to like relation to video games, because apparently the engine in this car, according to Wikipedia, is one that was developed by Roof, and Roof are a car manufacturer who you might have heard of before. They showed up in a bunch of video games for a while when Need for Speed and Porsche had an exclusivity deal, and Roof is technically a different car company, but makes cars that look very similar to Porsches, and they used to use literal like Porsche bodies to make their cars, and for a while a bunch of racing games had roofs instead of Porsches, and Driveclub actually has some roof cars too, but I didn't include them because they show up in a lot of different games, but I just thought that that's kind of an interesting fact there. Also, another interesting fact related to this car is that one of these showed up in Fast and Furious 7, and again, getting this info from Wikipedia, but apparently it was not like a real Motors Lykan Hypersport. According to Wikipedia, it was the same molds, but cheaper material and a simpler chassis, and I believe that a different engine. I read that somewhere a long time ago, but I think it had a different engine than the actual Lykan Hypersport does. Next, we have another car that I think has a very, very cool name. It is the Gumpert Apollo Enraged. Driveclub's info for this car has it with a 4.2 liter twin-turboed V8, rear-wheel drive with a rear-mounted engine, 769 horsepower, 678 pound-feet of torque, and it weighs 2,590 pounds. And I think it's interesting to pay attention to the engine mounting location listed here, because I don't know how accurate that is, because given the inaccuracies we've seen with a couple things in other cars, but this looks like it might actually be fully rear-mounted, which would mean that the engine is not only behind
behind the driver, but behind the rear wheels entirely. That being said, Wikipedia has it listed as just rear mid-engine, which would mean behind the driver, in front of the rear wheels. I don't really know which one's accurate, but I think Wikipedia is probably more accurate. Nonetheless, it's interesting to consider. I don't know entirely where else this car shows up, but if I remember right, it showed up in Need for Speed The Run also, and within Driveclub, this is actually one of the later vehicles that you unlock. You don't unlock this until you hit driver level 40, and when I started making this video, apparently I was not driver level 40, I was like driver level 39, which surprised me a little bit because I had played this game a lot a couple years ago, but I played it a little bit to unlock this car. It didn't take that long, but nonetheless, interesting to note. And anyway, overall, this is just another one of my personal favorite cars in the game. I think it looks really cool. It's very powerful, a lot of horsepower and stuff. Unfortunately, this is another one of the situations where Gumpert does not exist anymore, although I believe they've been succeeded by another company, so I'm not sure if this car actually is in production or not anymore. I don't think so, but I think technically Gumpert still exists as Apollo Motors now, according to Wikipedia. For the very last vehicle of this video, it's the Wombat Typhoon. This is also the very last vehicle listed in Driveclub's vehicle list, and I believe the only fictional vehicle in the game. I know that some of the cars in this game are like concept cars and might not have had a real production model or might have only had like one or whatever, but this is, I believe, the only one to be completely fictional and not from a car company. Driveclub's stats have this with a 2-liter inline 4, it's rear-wheel drive with a rear-mounted engine, makes 300 horsepower, 239 pound-feet of torque, and it weighs 2,017 pounds. Even though this is a fictional vehicle, this may not be the first time you've seen it because, as I mentioned earlier, Evolution Studios previously developed the MotorStorm games, and this originally was in MotorStorm. This is pretty much the only vehicle that would be specifically considered not an actual car or a motorcycle, because Driveclub also eventually added some motorcycles, because this is more of a dune buggy than anything else, and it's kind of the only off-road vehicle in the game as well. So far as I can tell, this is also the only vehicle in the game that can boost, and it has a sound that I believe is very similar to the one it would have had in MotorStorm. However, unlike MotorStorm, this is just a traditional limited boost. It's not like in MotorStorm where it will overheat and blow up your car. And I also just double-checked the Driveclub wiki because I was pretty sure that this didn't have penalties for certain things, and according to the Driveclub wiki, it does not have penalties for cutting corners, driving off-road, or contact, which makes sense because if it's from MotorStorm, that's like the entire basis of MotorStorm. And in general, it's just cool to see one of their cars carried over from another game, especially because it allows you to see it more in detail than you would have in a MotorStorm game. It's almost like how the Forza games had the Warthog from Halo eventually, and you could see all the dials and buttons and stuff. Driveclub doesn't necessarily get that in-depth, but you can see the inside of the car and see all the gauges and stuff like that. It's just kind of cool. And that's all of the vehicles that I wanted to cover in this video. I know that there are many other vehicles in Driveclub which I did not talk about in this video, so if you guys have any favorites or any others that you think are really interesting, make sure to let me know in the comments. Or in general, if there's any other vehicles from racing games or movies or anything that haven't really shown up that many other places, be sure to let me know. Driveclub in many ways is a really unique racing game. It does a lot of stuff differently than other simulation or simulcade games. A lot of the tracks in it are unique. It's got this whole roster of vehicles that you're probably not going to really see other places. And even though it's not a pure simulation game, in some ways it's like the only way to see sort of a simulated version of some of these vehicles aside from seeing them in real life, because even if they appear in other games, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's just stuff like Asphalt that are purely arcade racers. One of the issues with playing Driveclub now, though, is that the online functionality for it shut down a few years ago, and it's one of those games that pretty heavily relied on online functionality. If you find a disc of Driveclub, you can still play a pretty significant portion of the game. You can play a lot of the races, you can unlock a lot of the vehicles, but there was also a lot of stuff that was downloadable content, even if it was free, and that you just can't access anymore. Even some of the vehicles shown in this video would have required internet to unlock or were downloadable content. I just don't entirely remember which ones were which because it's been a while since I last played this game with this save file. Eventually the game did get DLC that expanded the car roster a good amount, and the Driveclub wiki actually says that it almost doubled the amount of cars in the game, and I know the DLC added at least a few American cars too. I know there were some Dodges added. I'm not sure about Japanese cars though, which is kind of strange given that the game has tracks in Japan. That being said though, if you did play this game previously, like a long time ago, and you still have your old save file, even if you're on another PlayStation, it's not that hard to transfer it over. I originally started this save file on my original PS4, and now I have a PS4 Pro, and I was able to transfer it so I could use all this stuff for the video, because otherwise it would have taken forever to unlock. Anyway though, that's pretty much everything for this video, so thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in other stuff in the future, and bye-bye.